Vatican to walk through the empty streets of Rome on Sunday. He prayed for an end to the coronavirus pandemic as he visited two pilgrimage sites. Italy is the epicenter of the outbreak in Europe, and the country is now on total lockdown. The Vatican announced earlier that Easter Mass will be closed to the public this year. And closures like that are becoming the new normal as religious leaders around the world take action to keep members of their congregations safe. Holy sites and religious schools are being shuttered, and many are canceling worship services until the threat of the virus subsides. CNN's Robin Corno has more about that.
Church bells ring out in a village in Poland as a call for Sunday service begins. But in this parish, there are no worshippers to be found. This Sunday, thousands of Christians across Europe and the globe stayed at home to pray in an effort to help fight the spread of the coronavirus. But the pandemic is now affecting the weekly worship of people from nearly all faiths. On Sunday, Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque announced that it too is closing. This is the usual scene on Fridays at Islam's third holiest site, the faithful gathering side by side for prayers. But this Friday, there were almost no worshippers and is now shuttered until further notice.
This is a very sad day that you see the Aqsa Mosque closed, but the health of humans is important. I hope that God will relieve this for all people and all the Muslims together.
In India, a famed Buddhist monastery is also shutting its doors. Any visitors are turned away, as its activities are suspended until at least April. Holy places that are remaining
That's something.
open are seeing historically low numbers. Images out of Mecca show far fewer pilgrims than in the past. And the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem was nearly without worshippers as well, as Israel's chief rabbis reportedly called on Jews to avoid the holy site. In Rome, some churches reopened as the country grapples with a lockdown, but attendance was sparse as the faithful remained divided.
I am convinced that closing churches was the right decision because contact is inevitable in a church, so it is good to take all possible precautions.
It
is an important comfort for believers, so perhaps with some caution and distances, it would be good to keep churches open.
The Vatican, however, is taking no risks. It's nearly deserted in St. Peter's Square. The Catholic Church has also announced that services at the Vatican will be held without worshippers through Easter week. The faithful in Rome and around the world are now left without a place of worship, as the coronavirus could change the way people pray together for the foreseeable future. Robin Kerno, CNN, Atlanta.
Thank you for watching this hour. I'm Natalie Allen. Find me on Twitter at AllenCNN. I'm also on Instagram at Natalie Allen CNN. Early Start is coming next.
Go international.
No matter where you are, an important perspective.
And the world entering a great unknown. No more big gatherings, millions home from work and school, bars and restaurants are closed. Another emergency interest rate cut. So why does the president say this is all under control? We have reports this morning from Rome, Paris, Madrid, Shanghai, Jerusalem, Johannesburg, and Germany. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is Early Start. I'm Christine Romans.
And I'm Laura Jarrett. It's Monday, March 16th. It's 4 a.m. here in New York. We begin with a new reality setting in. Americans are thinking twice about being in crowded places because of coronavirus. This is unknown territory we're in with no end in sight. And so, like Times Square in New York, the country is shutting down. But there are things you can do to stay safe. The CDC now recommends canceling all events with 50 or more people across the United States for 8 weeks. The White House point person on coronavirus, Vice President Mike Pence, says new guidelines on curfews and social distancing will come out today.
All this reaching into everyday life beyond work, religious services, birthday parties, the gym, mass transit, restaurants, spring break, and schools. More than 32 million public school students now at home. That's nearly 2/3 of public school pupils. New York City now added to the list, at least until April 20th.
We're dealing with a lot of unknowns and a lot of challenges. And we understand how difficult it will be to achieve that goal. I have been very honest about the fact that there is a real possibility that by closing our schools now, we may not have the opportunity to reopen them in this full school year.
Real concerns have been growing that not enough people were heeding warnings about avoiding big crowds. Now, governors of 5 states, Washington, California, Illinois, Ohio, and Massachusetts, have ordered bars, restaurants, and wineries all closed in an effort to slow the spread of coronavirus. The mayors of major cities, including New York, imposing similar restrictions hours after the nation's top infectious disease specialist said this.
I would like to see a dramatic diminution of the personal interaction that we see in restaurants and in bars. Whatever it takes to do that, that's what I'd like to see. The virus isn't a mathematical formula. There are going to be people who are young who are going to wind up getting seriously ill.
Now, in some cities, you can still get delivery and takeout, but staff like waiters and busboys will lose some or all of their income indefinitely.
Members of the White House coronavirus task force divided over whether further steps are necessary, like federal restrictions on domestic travel or some kind of a national lockdown. The president tried to address concerns last night.
Relax. We're doing great. It all will pass. It's a very contagious virus. It's incredible, but it's something that we have tremendous control of.
Tremendous control, even as the case count and the death toll climb. Minutes later, Dr. Fauci seemed to disagree with the president.
The worst is yet ahead for us. It is how we respond to that challenge that's going to determine what the ultimate endpoint is going to be.
Dr. Fauci also indicated he would support a national lockdown to stop the spread of the virus and flatten the curve. That's the strategy behind all the cancellations and closures nationwide. It's about socially conscious efforts to reduce the burden on the healthcare system, which could be swamped by a sudden surge in coronavirus cases. Healthcare groups are already raising concerns about supply shortages during this pandemic.
All right, another emergency interest rate cut. The Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to near zero to support the economy during the coronavirus pandemic. President Trump has repeatedly attacked the Fed, pushing it to cut rates. Sunday, he said the move is great for the country. The emergency rate cut failed to calm investors. In fact, it did the opposite. Futures immediately dropped the 5% limit overnight, hitting limit down, meaning they can't fall any further. In Asia, stocks mixed, really. Tokyo down 2%, Hong Kong down 4%, Shanghai down 3%. In Europe, actually, stocks are mixed at the moment. Paris up. We'll watch very closely to see what's happening in these markets.
They seen it coming. The feds here in America seen it coming. But it's a day late and a dollar short. They've done plummeted, bottomed out in Tokyo, Hong Kong. Paris is doing a little good. See, their markets open up on Monday. Probably about 4 or 5 hours ago. But we can tell what goes on over there now towards what our markets are going to do over here, because one market influences another market regardless of what side of the planet it's on. Wow. That is just absolutely, and to see where all those religious mosques are now empty. Italy, Rome, Wow. If this doesn't wake people up towards the seriousness of this, they're obviously either brain dead or they don't or can't or incapable of deciphering the difference between fact and fiction. If this report that is coming out just within the past 4 or 5 days that is escalating to the point that now they're actually talking about lockdowns with schools, lockdowns with restaurants, lockdowns with major sporting events, the state of Illinois, as well as the mayor of New York and the mayor of LA has requested for 50 or less gatherings to come together. In other words, if there's 50 or more people, don't even come to that area. Now they're talking about the lack of supplies here in America, shelves being stripped. We're fixing to walk off into something here, folks. We're fixing to walk off into something like we've never, ever had to encounter before. And it's going to be tough sailing for the next 6 to 8 weeks for a whole lot of people. Tough sailing, especially those in your higher populated areas where there's more people. Atlanta, Houston, Chicago, New York, Boston, Pennsylvania, Indianapolis, Louisville, Kentucky, Phoenix, Arizona, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, Washington, Seattle, Washington, even where the Mormons reside. St. Louis, Kansas City, Missouri, Topeka, Kansas, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Michigan, St. Paul, Miami, Tampa, Orlando, Daytona, Jacksonville, Florida, places in the South, Jackson, Mississippi, Little Rock, Arkansas, South Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, these are all major corridors in these states that I've just got through mentioning that it's going to be tough on. It's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call to the world. Whenever you see something like this happening that basically is going to be on the same levels of the, 1918 of the Spanish flu, the pandemic that basically circled the earth, I think, 3 or 4 different times. You know, they claimed that the reason why that after the pandemic flu, there really wasn't a whole lot written about it and putting on the records was because of the shame of how people responded and reacted during the great Spanish flu pandemic. How people responded and reacted to it. The Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. What society is enduring, are going to endure, other cultures and other societies in other eras have had to endure the same thing. Once things gets out of kilter, great grief, great sorrow falls up onto humanity in such of a way that it's just it's just eerie for the human mind to even think about. It is. It's absolutely gut-wrenching. So sad. Sad, sad, sad of what's around the corner. Especially sad for the innocent. Because in some form or fashion, even if you live in a very, very remote rural area, way out in the country somewhere, even if you had your property surrounded with dogs and fences and even guns, and you was wealthy enough that you could hire somebody to go get your supplies and bring them back to you, you're still going to be affected. In some way or another, you're still going to become affected. And this hadn't even hit. It hadn't even opened up yet down in South America and Mexico yet. You talk about the food chain. That's where the majority of our food chain comes from, is down in Mexico. That could absolutely be paralyzing to the crops that they, and the factory workers down there that bag up and can up stuff. It could be absolutely devastating to the food chain. I don't know if anybody's thought that through or not, but I mean, this could really, really get serious really, really quick whenever you're talking about something this devastating and something this dire. This could get really, really bad, really, really quick, to the point that it would exceed what went on during World War II as far as gas rationings, tire rationings, food rationings, rationing out. What they do? They gave out something like a book, like a S&H green stamps or something, to where if you used up those stamps in purchasing gas, once you used up your stamps, you didn't have no more privileges toward getting any more gas. Of course, that was over the war. The war is another man-made pandemic. It's just being demonstrated to society in a different way. it still has the same effects. Trust me, war still has the same effects pertaining to death and destruction. I have wept about this and wept about this and cried about this. And I know that this is about as serious as this particular generation, this particular culture is going to have to endure. This will make 9/11, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, Desert Storm War, all combined, it will possibly exceed and accelerate the grief and despair of what we may be fixing to have to face off on. And it literally makes me shudder to think that society is fixing to have to go through this. If there's ever been a time that people needed to get their hearts and their lives right with God, buddy, if you can't read the handwriting on the wall now, I don't care what state you're in, I don't care in what country you're in. If you can't read the handwriting on the wall by now, you're either blind or you're incapable of understanding the new reality that is fixing to be thrown up into the majority of people's laps in some form or fashion. Even if you was extremely rich, lived out on an island somewhere, or up in the hills somewhere, this will be profound. And there ain't nothing that we can do about it other than try to properly prepare and basically grin and bear it. I was just talking to the chief over in Sharon, Tennessee the other day. Stopped in to holler at him real quick. Let him know about the supposedly break-in or the attempted break-in out here at Miss Willis's property. Also let him know about the individual's house that caught a fire, his home that caught a fire. And then about 2 days later, he wound up in a horrible accident that wound up killing him. Me and him both was talking about him being over in Afghanistan and how that God protected him and kept him alive and allowed for him to come back home and become involved with law enforcement here in the United States, made a career out of it, began first working up there in Dresden. But we was talking about reality as far as death. And we both come to the same conclusion that whenever it comes your time to die, the only thing that any of us can do is basically grin and bear it once it comes your time. In whatever form, regardless whether it comes in the form of a bullet fighting over in the trenches of Afghanistan, or it comes in the form of a heart attack or a stroke or an aneurysm, or it comes in the form of a disease or a car accident, the only thing that people can do whenever death knocks on their door is to greet and bear it. There's no way of sugarcoating what we're fixing to have to experience. Let's listen to the rest of this morning, because I don't even know for sure if the YMCA in Trenton's even going to be going this morning or not. I was doing something last night on my phone, and I got a memo that the YMCA was going to be haltering a great deal of their services all over, not just in one state, not just in one area, but all over the nation, all over, because the YMCA actually has gyms in other parts of the world. They got them, I think, if I'm not mistaken, over in Germany. I know they got them. I know they got them all over the world. They're that big that they have gym facilities all over the world. But yeah, I got a memo from the YMCA saying that a great deal of their services would be canceled or put on hold until further notice. Now, what extent of that is going to be per se in each individual YMCA, I don't know. I'm sure that will be up to the manager, whoever's managing the YMCA, at their discretion towards whether or not they're going to allow for this to be open or that to participate or that to not to participate, based upon the circumstances, playing it by ear on a need-to-know basis. Once more, this is something that is migrating, mutating. This is something that is escalating. This is something that is evolving on a hour-to-hour, day-to-day, week-to-week, and may possibly even be a month-to-month situation. So people needs to properly prepare. This isn't just going to be like a drive-by pertaining to a tornado or a massive flood. This is possibly going to be something that's going to hang around for a great deal of time, because there's been other pandemics that has circled the planet more than once. In other words, people that was exposed to it that didn't get caught up in the first get up wound up getting caught up in the second get up, and it has been known to circle the earth 3 different times. That's why the CDC, the disease control, world control people, they document this stuff and they recognize it real quick. These professionals, they know if this is something that is just like a normal cold or the normal flu, or if this is really something that's going to affect cultures. And whenever they go to raising red flags, and you start seeing whole developmental countries shut down, you know that this is in full force. And of course, the only way to address it in a Draconian way, like China done, is basically shut down everything. Let it mutate. Quit spreading it from one person to the other. Take all the proper precautions. That's the only way that you're going to be able to minimize the damage that it's going to cause. And our scientists and our professional people are recognizing that. Please, let's watch the rest of this.
To fight the spread of coronavirus, something that could throw the U.S. into a recession. Goldman Sachs downgraded its growth forecast for the U.S. 0% for the first quarter, down 5% in the second quarter. That is a steep and fierce contraction. United Airlines slashing its flight schedule by half for the next 2 months. American Airlines cutting international capacity by 75% until early May. Nike, Urban Outfitters, and more retailers temporarily shutting their doors, but they stressed their online stores would remain open. Disney closing all of its stores starting tomorrow. Its hotels and resorts will close on Friday. Despite panic, there's plenty of food in the U.S. Walmart is shortening hours at all of its stores until further notice. The shorter hours will help employees restock the shelves overnight and clean their stores. Publix and Stop & Shop have also changed their hours.
The Senate is expected to take up a coronavirus aid bill that passed in the House early Saturday morning. The measure provides 2 weeks of paid sick leave and up to 3 months of paid family and medical leave for workers affected by the virus. It will also expand federal funding for Medicaid to support health systems in hard-hit communities. The bill does have an exemption for businesses with 500 employees or more, and companies with fewer than 50 employees can apply for an exemption. That means as few as 20% of workers may actually be covered by this. A Democratic source tells CNN the compromise was necessary just to have something rather than nothing, but it's certainly not what Vice President Mike Pence or Speaker Nancy Pelosi were touting.
All right, chaos, a madhouse. That's how travelers describe the scene at airports as they return from overseas to the U.S. this weekend. These pictures are just, that is not social distancing. Scores of people packed into overcrowded lines, waiting up to 5 hours at the airport for coronavirus screenings. Close quarters, exactly the opposite of what is being preached by health officials.
All this disarray at the airport stems from the restrictions President Trump announced last week on travelers from 26 European countries.
I was told over the weekend it was total chaos up in your major international airlines towards the masses coming back from third world countries, knowing that their flight plans was fixing to be delayed, postponed, that people was just literally fighting one another towards trying to see, and God only knows what those tickets was costing some of them people. I'm sure some of those people was probably paying as much as $2,000 or $3,000 just for a one-way ticket from point A to point B to getting back here to the United States. There ain't no telling. Of course, these are people more than likely that's got money. You know, if you got money to fly all over the world, odds are you got money. You got it from somewhere. You either inherited it, or you had a business, or you was lucky in Wall Street, or you was an attorney, or a Hollywood movie star, or a ball game player, or something. Obviously, you got the money to be able to fly back and forth, so you're dealing with the rich sector right there. But you know, the thing about a coronavirus on a pandemic, it's not judgmental. It don't discriminate. It don't know the difference between rich and poor. It does not discriminate between who has valuable knowledge as far as education versus somebody that is on the lower end of the totem pole towards not having no education. It doesn't matter if you're a king or a queen or a prince, or if you're a president or a vice president. This coronavirus does not discriminate. Whoever gets it, hopefully that their immune system will be strong enough to fight it off. And if not, they may suffer great consequences on account of getting this germ. And whenever you compile all them people together like you're looking at right there, basically what you're looking at there is an incubator. You're looking at an incubator to where one person is spreading bacteria coming from their lungs, little drops of, have you ever noticed your phone? You know how people ordinarily, they don't put their phone up to their ear mostly anymore. They just talk loudspeaker. Have you ever noticed how your phone gets real filthy? And the face of it, you got to clean it about every week. That's because of the droplets that's coming out of your lungs. As your lungs is working and turning things into oxygen as you're talking, you still disperse liquids out of your air system. Those liquids is what the CDC is talking about, trying to stay within 6 feet of somebody else. That way, if they do have the germ, you won't necessarily have to be contaminated by them being contaminated. What you're looking at right there is not 6 feet apart. As a matter of fact, some of those people are elbow to elbow. They're almost in each other's face. So basically what you're looking at there, and the majority of them don't have no masks. You don't see no masks. What you're seeing is an environment for this disease to mutate and evolve even further, especially if just one person in there had it. It could spread to half of that population right there. Let's say we're looking at 2,000 people in that hallway right there. Out of that 2,000 people, half of them could now go home and discover 10, 12, 15 days later that they got the disease. That's how contagious that this stuff is. It is very, very contagious. It's like the flu on steroids.
UK and Ireland are now being added to that list. Students coming in from Poland say they faced long lines and mass confusion.
So if I'm an American and I don't get out of here by midnight, I'm just stuck here. How does that work? That doesn't make any sense. And if there's a process for me getting out after that 12 a.m. Deadline, that's fine, but there's no process communicated. There's no idea about what we were supposed to have done if we had not gotten out. No information at all.
Some of the biggest issues were in Chicago at O'Hare, one of 13 airports doing enhanced screenings.
We did make the necessary adjustments at 12 of the funneling airports. However, again, at Chicago, those adjustments were not made quick enough, but we have course corrected. We've adjusted our processes. We continue to surge personnel, and we are certainly glad to see certain airports and certain airlines step up, partner with us, and help address this unprecedented situation.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection says it's increased staffing at some airports and that wait times for travelers were lower on Sunday.
There were some this weekend who were looking at those pictures. I mean, those pictures were all over social media of these long lines and
packed in like sardines.
And they were saying this is the picture of the federal response, the chaotic federal response, and that was not something that added to the optimism, I think, in global markets. Right, fallout from all of this in all corners of the globe. Bars closed in Ireland, empty streets in major cities. CNN has reporters all around the world. Next.
Is cleaning.
Away.
All right. At this hour, there are more than 153,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus worldwide, with Europe now the epicenter of the crisis. In Ireland, the government is calling on pubs to close and is asking the public not to participate in any parties on the eve of St. Patrick's Day. The Vatican has canceled all its Easter week celebrations and masses to curb the spread of the virus.
France taking new drastic containment measures after announcing 300 people infected with coronavirus are in intensive care, half under the age of 60 years old. CNN's Jim Bitterman is live from Paris. And Jim, what is the mood there with all of the bars and restaurants and clubs now closed?
Well, it's pretty somber, Laurel. I would say the joie de vivre has disappeared from a lot of French streets. Fact is that when this edict came down on Saturday night by the Prime Minister, it was a real shock. I was sitting in a restaurant, as a matter of fact, and it came down, and we were having dinner, and the owner of the restaurant came by and looking a little shocked, said, "You're going to be my last customers because we have to close down until further notice." He was like everybody else, had having to close their establishments. Now, what happened on Sunday was that, in fact, there was a lot of sunshine and it was a nice day. People went out and they got in close contact. The authorities were not happy about that. And so now we are hearing, it's being reported by fairly reliable sources here, that, in fact, the government is considering an even more drastic approach. They're going to perhaps confine people to their homes in the same way that we've seen in Spain and Italy. So it could get a lot worse here over the next few days. Laura?
All right, Jim, thanks so much for that report.
All right, with the majority of coronavirus cases spreading outside mainland China, the country where the outbreak first emerged is gradually returning to normal. Now its government is offering to help elsewhere. I want to bring in David Culver live in Shanghai. David, you are ahead of the curve for us here. You have been in quarantine, you've been through this, and now you're on the other side of it. What is Beijing doing? What does it look like there?
Yeah, you're right. Nearing 8 weeks of this. And I can tell you major cities like Beijing and here in Shanghai, Christine, they are starting to come back online. And the way I've kind of described it is we're seeing 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And by that, I mean, while you start to see restaurants reopening, there's discussion of teachers for foreign schools coming back by this time next week so that they can start their 2 weeks of quarantine, which shows that things are in motion. We also start to see some easing of restrictions in some places like Hubei province, but then they'll withdraw that easing of restriction and they'll put back in place some of the lockdown requirements. And that's because they're a little bit uneasy about just opening up the gates, and understandably so, because the World Health Organization has stressed the greatest risk in all of this is complacency, thinking, yeah, we've got this beat. And so what we're seeing now is a warning even out of Wuhan, the capital of Hubei, where this all started, and the stressing from health officials there that the situation is still severe. That just came out today. They're still asking folks there to avoid going outside. Now, outside of Wuhan and other parts of Hubei, once again, after revoking some of the easing of restrictions, they're putting back in the easing of restrictions. So it's kind of this back and forth, this dance of let's see how this plays out. And they're doing so cautiously because they are a little bit uneasy of those numbers starting to rise little by little as people start to move around and go back to normal. Needless to say, though, it is starting to feel a little bit more like normal here. In Shanghai, a city of 24+ million people, over the weekend, you start to see restaurants filling back up again. You start to see more and more people easing back into their normal routine. So it is reassuring, Christine, I know for folks, particularly where you are in the U.S., looking onward to say, is there a light at the end of this? And the answer is seemingly so.
All right, David Culver for us in Shanghai.
But it's still severe. And they're still being very cautious after 8 weeks later. To give you an in-depth about the severity of this. 8 weeks later, they're still walking on eggshells towards still advising people to stay inside and to limit large gatherings. So they're not completely out of the woods yet. And they know it. And they know it.
This morning. Thank you, David.
Well, new limits on public gatherings are now being imposed in Israel, and they go further than anything we've seen here in the United States. The coronavirus crisis is also having unintended political consequences. Let's go live to Jerusalem and bring in CNN's Oren Lieberman. Oren, what's the latest there?
Well, Laura, Israel has been at the forefront of putting in place some of the most stringent restrictions to try to limit the spread of coronavirus, and it remains that way. It used to be that you had to limit gatherings to 5,000. Well, over the weekend, that number was changed to 10. Just 10 people are allowed in gatherings to try to limit the spread of coronavirus. Meanwhile, restaurants Cafes are closed, entertainment venues, leisure venues, those are all closed as well, with some rumors circulating here that it's not long before they shut down public transportation as well, all in an attempt to try to keep this as limited as possible. There are now some 250 confirmed cases in Israel, not that big of a number, but a number that is still rising very quickly. On Friday, that number was 100, so you see how quickly it's rising. And in the middle of all this, and this includes challenges to the economy, the military, the health system, and much more, there is, of course, an ongoing political crisis that's lasted more than a year, as Israel hasn't had a fully functioning government since Christmas Eve 2018. And perhaps coronavirus could do what the politicians could not, which is bring the two largest parties together, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party and Benny Gantz's Blue and White party, and either find some sort of unity government or some sort of national emergency government to get Israel through this crisis. But there are no guarantees there, and that's the challenge ahead. All sides are calling on a unity government or an emergency government to deal with this, but calling for it and actually getting there are two very different things. Laura, a fourth election is theoretically at least a possibility, but how you'd hold an election under these circumstances, even if it's still months away, again, that another challenge this country would have to try to deal with.
Yes.
And that's sad. That is really, really so sad because, you know, like he said, theoretically, on paper it sounds good, but for them to actually do that just shows you how far apart and how separated and divided that those poor souls over there are. That is so sad. Whenever they can't put aside their differences in the middle of a crisis like this.
Certainly something we're struggling with here in the U.S. in the middle of primary season as well. Oren, thanks so much for that.
All right, a much different feel to last night's debate between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and Biden made a bold promise if he wins the nomination.
Dare to take risks. You witness passion and persistence. And they just want to get their past be processed so they can get out of this facility. And that's where change happens. The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
I'm Alex Thomas, and this is CNN.
Welcome back. It was a presidential debate like none before. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders elbow bumping instead of shaking hands, then sparring one-on-one while standing the recommended 6 feet apart in a studio with no live audience. Coronavirus topping the agenda last night.
We have to do testing. We have to get the testing kits up and ready. I would have the World Health Organization. I'd take advantage of the test kits they have available to us, even though the president says 1 million or more are coming. Let's just get all the tests we can done as quickly as we can. Secondly, I would make sure that every state in the union had at least 10 places where they had drive-through testing arrangements. I would also, at this point, deal with the need to begin to plan for the need for additional hospital beds.
The former vice president also made a big commitment on picking a running mate if he wins the nomination.
If I'm elected president, my cabinet, my administration will look like the country. And I commit that I will, in fact, pick a woman to be vice president. There are a number of women who are qualified to be president tomorrow. I would pick a woman to be my vice president.
Senator Sanders says in all likelihood he would do the same. 4 states vote tomorrow. Biden leads in all of them. Last night, Sanders questioned whether voting should even take place as planned. States are encouraging early voting and taking social distancing precautions. American companies are stepping up to help people cope with the coronavirus pandemic. Comcast, AT&T, and Charter all offering free Wi-Fi for 60 days for students and those who are working from home. U-Haul providing 30 days of free storage to college students who were suddenly forced to move out.
Chinese billionaire Jack Ma vowing to donate 1 million face masks and 500,000 coronavirus test kits to the United States. And luxury perfume makers Dior and Givenchy will produce something more practical, free hand sanitizer for French health authorities.
It's all about protecting yourself and the people around you. I wish I would have took this thing more seriously, and I hope everyone else will do so, because we can do it together.
That mea culpa from Rudy Gobert, the infected Utah Jazz star, donating over $500,000 to arena employees and COVID-related social services in Utah, Oklahoma City, and his native France.
All right, what does the world look like after coronavirus?
You know, out of all the bad, there'll always be good. And I hope that the good will outweigh the bad in this event that's now going to touch the vast majority of all of our lives all over the world.
And when will we get there? No one knows. Major changes for social and business life. Some Vegas casinos closed, Colorado ski resorts closed. People looking wherever they can for stability, including this florist in Oregon.
It's funny how here this becomes a bar to a certain extent. People want to talk and be heard, and so everybody's stopping by and getting a flower. But also, I'm hearing a lot of concerns.
Still peeling. Women of the future. Passionate about yourself.
The U.S. and the world are entering a great unknown. No more big gatherings, millions home from work and school, bars and restaurants are shut. Another emergency rate cut. So why does the president say this is all under control? We have reports this morning from Rome, Paris, Madrid, Shanghai, Jerusalem, Johannesburg, and Germany. Welcome back to Early Start. I'm Laura Jarrett.
And I'm Christine Romans. It is 30 minutes past the hour here in New York. You know, a new reality is setting in. Americans are thinking twice about being in crowded places because of coronavirus. This is unknown territory with no end in sight. And so, like Times Square in New York, the country is shutting down. The CDC now recommends canceling all events with 50 or more people across the United States for 8 weeks. The White House point person on coronavirus, Vice President Mike Pence, says new guidelines on curfews and social distancing will come out today.
All this reaching into everyday life, beyond work, religious services, birthday parties, the gym, mass transit, restaurants, spring break, and schools. More than 32 million public school students now at home. That's nearly 2/3 of public school children. New York City now added to the list until at least April 20th.
We're dealing with a lot of unknowns and a lot of challenges, and we understand how difficult it will be to achieve that goal. I have been very honest about the fact that there is a real possibility that by closing our schools now, we may not have the opportunity to reopen them in this full school year.
Concerns have been growing that not enough people were heeding warnings to avoid big crowds. Now, governors of 5 states, Washington, California, Illinois, Ohio, and Massachusetts, they've ordered bars, restaurants, and wineries closed in an effort to slow the spread of the virus. The mayors of major cities, including New York, imposing similar restrictions hours after the nation's top infectious disease specialist said this.
I would like to see a dramatic diminution of the personal interaction that we see in restaurants and in bars. Whatever it takes to do that, that's what I'd like to see. The virus isn't a mathematical formula. There are going to be people who are young who are going to wind up getting seriously ill.
In some cities, you can still get delivery and takeout, but
cancer a partisan issue now? I mean, the virus is now a partisan issue. You see all reality through a partisan lens. And that's just one of the divides that's going to open up. I looked back and read about all the different pandemics over centuries. And you think people come together in a crisis? They do in some kind of crisis, but in pandemic, they fall apart. The reporting from every crisis for the last 1,000 years of this sort is that neighbors withdraw from neighbors. You get widened class divisions. You get, out of fear, you get a spirit of callousness.
Don't forget xenophobia.
And so in 1918, we lost 675,000 Americans to the flu, and nobody wanted to talk about it afterwards. And that's because they were ashamed of how they behaved. And so We need to take some moral step to neighbors to each other. Hey, we lost 675,000 Americans to the flu, and nobody wanted to talk about it afterwards. And that's because they were ashamed of how they behaved. Flu, and nobody wanted to talk about it afterwards. And that's because they were ashamed of how they behaved. And nobody wanted to talk about it afterwards. And that's because they were ashamed of how they behaved. And so we need to take some moral step to make ourselves decent neighbors to each other as we go sort of this thing. Like, I think people should get on Nextdoor, this sort of Facebook for neighbors, so at least you know what's going on right around you, which is super important. And so this is going to be not only a health crisis and a financial crisis, it's how we treat each other is going to deteriorate, and we're not going to like who we're about to become.
Yamiche, wow. You painted it.
Good luck to all of us. And shalom. Shalom to my viewers.